Welcome to Me Financial, the podcast designed to inspire your financial life. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the podcast. I am Michelle Moses, your host. I am a certified financial planner and realtor and the host of this wonderful show. Thank you so much for listening. Today, we are going to be talking about questions to ask when looking for a tax professional. I wanted to cover this because I feel like a lot of people just say, oh yeah, you can help me with my taxes, but then they kind of get into it and they can't, sometimes people can't do if you get IRS audited and they can't do other things. So I think it's important to know what questions to ask to see if it's a good fit. Because I know that in the past I have had a CPA and then it's like I get this bill and it's for thousands of dollars. And then I'm wondering, kind of what they did. And I didn't ask ahead of time what I was supposed to do.
Yeah.
So to talk about this, I have Corina Vakira Delugos, MBA here. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, Karina is a financial services professional with over 25 years of experience specializing in tax, mortgage, and insurance planning. She's the owner of Keen Financial Solutions here in Phoenix, Arizona. She's passionate about helping families create and protect wealth, increase liquidity, and reduce tax liability.
Yeah.
So let's get started.
Let's.
Yeah. So thanks again for taking time to be on here. I appreciate it.
Of course.
Karina and I have a lot of mutual interests, I should say, in terms of real estate and the way that we look at numbers. And so we are kind of like-minded in a lot of ways. So I had her on. Yeah. Okay, so the topic is questions for when looking for a tax professional. And Karina, you actually brought this topic to me because do you see this a lot in what you, in your job, I guess?
Yeah, what I notice is when people come to me, I ask them about what has your previous experience been? Tell me, because I want to understand what their pain points are. And oftentimes, what I've come to learn is that folks will simply get into an engagement with a tax professional, a CPA. Some of them are just simply not credentialed and don't have much experience, and they don't ask any questions. And then when I get to their return and I'm reviewing them and I'm asking more questions to understand their situation or to understand why certain things showed up on their return, clients have no idea because they didn't have a good experience in that their tax professional, even a CPA too, didn't take the time to go through and explain to them their tax return, what each page means. And so they come to me sometimes with really not knowing much and not knowing what to do about it. So they just feel totally in the dark where I don't even know what questions to ask. So I developed a guide of questions to help clients or really just the general public. Here are some questions that you should be asking when you're engaging with a tax professional. And they're really critical to understand each other because, like you said, it's important that it's a good fit, that you guys have the same communication style, that your expectations are aligned, that if you expect to have a sit down with your CPA, your tax professional, your enrolled agent, that there's an expectation that there's going to be some time spent to help educate you so that you can understand what's going on. Oftentimes, when I'm working with somebody on a mortgage and I look at their returns and it's the first time I'm seeing them because they're not necessarily a tax client, I'll have questions for them that they can't answer. And they have no idea why they have a Schedule C, for example, when they don't have a business. And so it's really important to ask good questions, especially around like, what are your qualifications and credentials? Where did you... not necessarily where did you go to school and that kind of thing, but where did you get your experience? Was it through practical work? Was it through doing something, doing returns for your friends and family only? That's really important because you want to get an understanding of their level of experience, especially if you're a business owner. I know you and I work with a lot of business owners and investors. It's really important for business owners to understand what's in their return because when you go for financing, there are some questions that will come up as, from that return that you're going to want to have answers to.
Right.
And if you haven't been educated by your tax professional, it's going to be really difficult for you to have that conversation because some of these things, when we're looking at tax returns going back 2 years, sometimes 3, you've forgotten.
Yeah.
You don't remember. And so it can make things a little challenging later on down the line.
Right. And I've found it very interesting because I have some friends that are CPAs and they don't do any personal taxes at all.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they're like, no, I work for this business, I work for this such and such business, or all I do is business valuations. Or, they don't even know how to do personal tax returns. And we all assume, hey, you're a CPA, you know how to do tax returns.
That is a great point. Yeah.
Right?
A lot of folks don't understand or don't realize, just the general public, you think CPA, and that's probably because we've done a terrible job at marketing and educating the public on what it is that a CPA does, because some CPAs, like you said, they do business valuations. They only handle audits and resolutions. They don't look at tax returns. They could be working on financial statements for mergers and acquisitions. So not every CPA does any tax returns. There's many, many CPAs who don't. And in fact, there's a shortage of accountants in the country right now.
Yeah.
And us, part of the accounting community, are trying to bring more young people in, because the larger firms are really filling in the gap on that pipeline that's missing for this particular industry in this field. But also to make sure that we have a robust, trying to get more women involved in the business and doing more recruiting to be able to get more accountants in, especially on the tax planning side, which is really needed because folks are, for the most part, lost on why is my tax bill this way?
Right.
How am I taxed? It's not something that we learn in school. It's something that if you are personally interested in, you have to go seek that information out.
Right.
Unless you have a tax professional who is more proactive in their education, and I'm
well,
that
and
way.
then during tax time, it's not like they have time to educate everyone either. It's almost like, okay, I got this tax return done. It's done. We're gonna have a 10-minute phone conversation over it, and then I'm on to the next one.
Right. And oftentimes the tax preparers, those of us who are doing it, we're very busy. And so that time is limited. And that's why it is important that when you're thinking about engaging with somebody, that you ask them about what can I expect in terms of your availability during tax time? Will we be going over my return before filing? Because those
How
are
do you
things
communicate?
How do you communicate those kinds of things so that you have that expectation? And another thing that's really important, you had mentioned it, getting a bill from your CPA that was unexpected. What's important one of the things that is important for us here at Keen Financial Solutions is pricing transparency. So we give you your pricing up front so that you know exactly how much you're going to pay.
That's really rare because when I was having to find a new tax preparer, it was really hard to it depends on how much you have. And, that's a tough one.
And so we base our pricing based off of, it is a subscription model, but people do have the option to pay upfront. And if they pay all at once, then it comes out a little bit cheaper for them. But one thing to talk about and to mention, I'm losing my train of thought here because I have too many things that I'm thinking about, was the upfront pricing, right? Like understanding what is it that you need. I had a client just recently acquired a client who he was sure he was a Schedule C, but then later we come to find out that he actually has an S corporation. So we're actually doing his taxes under the S corporation guidance, which is different. So it's important to understand what that is. And that could be some of the reason why some CPAs or tax professionals won't be able to give you a price until after because they don't properly understand it. But that's why it's important to ask those questions.
Yeah, it is. Well, at least they could give you an estimate. And I find it interesting too, because as I have switched tax preparers or CPAs through the years, most of the time the new one I go to says, oh, this one wasn't done right. Mm-hmm. And that's what I find interesting too, is that it varies so much on, is it the knowledge that people have? Is that what it is?
It could be a difference in knowledge, but also a difference in strategy.
Okay.
And I think that's why it's important to work with a tax professional who has a forward-thinking approach, who is proactive in terms of the tax planning. Because when we get to the tax preparation piece, it's already after the fact. I've had clients come to me who are like, hey, I don't understand why I'm paying capital gains on the sale of this house when I lived there for 25 years, but the last 5 years it has been a rental. They didn't properly understand how that primary residence exclusion works, and that it didn't apply to them because this property had been a rental for so long. So when you do tax return and you're not having those pre-planning conversations, regular conversations with your tax professional throughout the year, when you're planning on buying a property.
That's what I think is so important is that come October, you need to be thinking about, I mean, if you're don't have just a straight job with 401k and own your house and that sort of thing, if you have other things, going to your tax preparer and doing some planning in October can just save you thousands of dollars.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because
it's totally worth it.
Yes.
And then it's so much easier in April.
Right. Totally. So it could be a difference of strategy. But the other thing is that you can go about preparing the return and including or excluding certain expenses and putting them in one place versus another, treating something as an asset versus just deducting mileage. For example, if we're talking about vehicles, there are different strategies that people employ. So when you go from one to a next, it may not necessarily be that it's wrong, but maybe they took a different approach or strategy.
So how would you ask a question about what their strategy is? Because I think some people just know to ask how aggressive they are, right? Because I think that's what you hear is how aggressive is someone versus are they towing the line of whether that's legal or not, or, straight and narrow. Those are the only two kind of things that you hear. So is there a way to ask about their strategy?
Well, at least I can say that the way that we approach it is that we're looking more at what are your goals? What are you trying to accomplish? What are some of the things that you're thinking in the future that could potentially happen? Are you thinking of starting to, you want to acquire a couple properties throughout the year and maybe do some 1031s exchanges? So the strategy is going to depend on the goals of the client. Where are they trying to get you to? Are you trying to get to a zero tax bracket by the time we get to retirement? Maybe, maybe not. So it just really depends
on what their goals are.
On what the goals are,
okay.
and understanding if there's a W-2 employee and both husband and wife, if it's a couple. If they're both W-2, our strategies are going to be limited. But if they're a business owner and they're a property investor, then we open up and can unlock many, many more strategies that we can employ.
Okay. All right. I think all of this sounds really good. And so that would kind of cover like what kind of clients do you normally work with, right? Because that was one of the questions that you recommend is asking what kind of clients do you typically work with?
Right. You want to ask what kind of clients do you typically work with? Because if you're a business owner, let's just take myself as an example, right? I'm a business owner. I have 3 different product lines. You could have several different product lines or services siloed individually under an umbrella organization. If you go to a tax professional and you don't ask them what kind of clients that they work with, like business owners, do you have experience with business returns? If you don't ask those questions, you might be getting somebody who only does W-2 employees and has no idea about an 1120.
Now that you bring that up, I had that happen. I submitted all my stuff and I had flipped a house and she just said, I can't help you. I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, okay. And I was really late and, it wasn't good.
So it's important to know, like, do you have experience helping people like me? And it's a good question. Like, hey, do you have a reference? Do you have somebody in your clientele that is similar in business structure as me that I could talk to about, and if they're a good professional, they'll gladly give you some referrals of folks to talk to let them know, what it's like.
Okay. Well, and I think that brings us to another question is recommendations that you recommend that you ask for recommendations and then call them.
Yeah, for references, just like you would if you're hiring anybody. I mean, this is your money that we're talking about. So you want to take the same sort of care and due diligence that you would when you're trying to work with any other financial professional. Right.
Okay. And then, so we talked about fees and then let's talk a little bit about what's expected of the client. Because that's what I always find very helpful is not only the communication, what you can expect, hey, we're going to talk once a quarter or, whatever it is. But also what do you expect from the client is a good question.
Oh yeah.
Also,
I would, if I were the client, I would definitely want to know what my service provider, what my tax professional needed out of me, because I may not be able to necessarily deliver, or I may need to say, hey, do you guys have any additional services in terms of support that could help me with this?
Yeah.
Certain things like my expectation would be that clients need to have a record of their receipts. They're expected to keep certain logs on mileage. I expect them to keep their receipts and save them and have it. Doesn't have to be perfectly organized, but at least they need to have them, and they need to have them to exist, because I'm going to ask them to, do you have records and receipts of these expenses that you're submitting? I don't need to see all the receipts. In fact, it's better that I don't, but you are going to need to put together your list of expenses. I'm not going to be able to tease those out if you just give me your bank statements, especially if you get your groceries and some office supplies at Walmart. How am I going to distinguish if this expense
you need a bookkeeper for that.
You need a bookkeeper for some of these things. And we do offer bookkeeping services if people need that. So there's a certain amount of organization that is expected. I certainly expect my clients to be responsive if I'm asking questions and I'm actively working on their return within a reasonable amount of time. Otherwise, if folks don't get back to you with those questions, you can't move on with that return, right?
Yeah,
because some things depend on another.
Yeah, and I find that, and I don't know if this is true for you, but in my industry, that a lot of times people just want to push all their stuff to me and just, okay, you do it and I'll do whatever. And it's really a partnership. I need them to do things. I need them to be thinking about things. And hey, I would like to do this because I'm not a mind reader. And if, I don't know, just simple things like I don't know that you changed your last name. You need to tell me that so that, you know what I mean? Like there just needs to be a partnership versus because I feel like a lot of people just want to avoid the whole money thing and they just want to hire somebody to just do it for them. And that's not what we are.
Right. And because I need, and you probably do too, it sounds like you need your clients to be an active participant in their own wealth creation. As much as they might want to avoid it and just hand it all over, you've got to participate and we've got to talk about it. We can talk about it. It doesn't have to be an emotional conversation. These are just numbers, right?
Yeah.
I need to understand and be able to tell the story, because if the IRS has 3 years to reassess tax. So if you get audited at any time and there's a reassessment, I need to be able to understand what's going on. Because if I'm going to be representing you in front of the IRS in communications with them, especially if we have an audit, an examination is what the IRS calls it, or we have something that we need to resolve, I can't be a good advocate if I don't know the whole story. Well,
let's go into that too. That's one of the questions that you need to ask, right? Is about, do they do audits? Because everybody doesn't do IRS audits, right?
Yeah, that is correct.
Okay.
I don't do IRS audits. I usually refer those out to a partner that I work with that has an audit. If it's a reassessment of taxes, that is different than you need to do an examination, and we need certain books and records. That may be out of scope for us, where we're going to hand that over to another firm that will be more equipped to handle that. Just depends on the type and expanse of your business. If you're a sole proprietor, and you're using a Schedule C, even if you have an LLC, that would be something that would be within our scope of services. But anything beyond that, if you had a business return and you had multiple businesses, we would outsource that and put you in touch with competent tax professionals who specialize in audits.
Okay. All right. I think that sounds good, because I know that some people, you have to specialize in it, right? Yes. And you have to be like licensed with the IRS in order to do
right.
Those.
And that's an important point that you bring up. So there are only 3 credentialed types of professionally credentialed folks who can represent clients before the IRS, and that's a CPA, an enrolled agent, and a tax attorney. If you're working with somebody who isn't one of those 3, their ability to represent you or to just communicate with the IRS or even the Arizona Department of Revenue. I have a client that...
It's no better than you calling.
It's no better than you calling.
And being on hold for hours.
Exactly. So if you need...
They have like an inside track.
And if you are somebody who is like, you're running multiple businesses, you're very busy, and it's something you do legitimately need to delegate to us, great. You can certainly do that. We will hang on the phone and do that. Certainly there's going to be added additional cost. And at that point, it's a matter of how much is your time worth? Are you going to be better off focusing on your work and delegating that to us? And then we'll, have our folks sit on the line with the IRS and discuss this for you on your behalf, and then come back and say, hey, Jim, this is how it turned out. This is where we landed. What do you want to do from here?
Would it be better if you were just like on the phone? If the client was on the phone too?
Not necessarily.
Really? Because it's just a step-by-step process.
Well, because sometimes
we're kind of getting off track here. I'm just wondering for my own information.
Your client is going to want to say everything that they feel like they need to say for the IRS to understand. And most of the time, the IRS just simply doesn't care.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we all know that. Okay. Okay. So the last question that we have here is, how do you handle client confidentiality and data security?
Oh, that's a really big one. So we have layers of protection with an IT department that we work with. So we have a third-party IT contractor that seals up. We use VPNs, so virtual private networks. We don't log on to public networks. So we restrict some of the access that our employees can have and to use with each of our client data so that it's on a need-to-know basis. If we have another accountant on staff who is working on different cases and they're not assigned to that case, you can't go into and look into that customer's portal of documents and information if you are not an active person engaged and authorized with that particular client.
Okay. All right.
We have some internal safeguards, and then, of course, having the protection that we need on the external side to make sure that the bad, malicious things, phishing, aren't coming in. So we have our third-party company, and they're regularly doing tests to see whether any of us are clicking on a link that we shouldn't be clicking on, the spoofing, the phishing, and things like that.
Oh, they do the testing, phishing emails.
Yeah.
Some of those are actually really very tricky.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I know.
They are very
I know
convincing.
definitely companies that do that. So, okay. So some of the questions, just to recap, you guys, of things that you should ask when you're looking for a tax professional are: what are your qualifications and credentials, and what types of clients do you typically work with, and what services do you offer? Ask for some references from some other clients. And I do think another big one is, what's your approach to communication, and how will you be able to contact them or communicate with them, especially during tax season? What's the easiest way? Because sometimes they hire like temporary, help and things like that. How much do you charge for your services? And how do you handle the client confidentiality and data security? And then, what are your expectations for me as a client? I would actually put that at like number 3. I should have moved that up there.
Should go. Last,
but maybe just because we do what we do is that we think that is, but
right.
It's kind of up to us to also say that too. But I think a lot of those are very important things. And I just think that a lot of times we just go with whoever, my friend recommended so-and-so, and I don't even know if this is good.
I'm guilty of that personally.
I'm absolutely guilty of it. And over the years, I have learned to ask questions. And then I look at things and I'm like, why are we even doing this? And I mean, I do what I do, and I don't even review. I mean, I review my taxes, but then I wasn't reviewing the quarterly documents that were going. There's just so much detail that to review all of it, it does take a lot. And I see why people want to just offload it, because it is a pain.
It can be overwhelming. It certainly can be. And that's why it's really important to make sure that you have trust and confidence in the person that you're working with. Because there are, I've seen some really bad things out there. The biggest bad thing that I've seen are folks who are working with uncredentialed and unlicensed, unexperienced tax. I'm not even call them professionals, because I do think they're scammers, where they don't even sign their return. They're not authorized. They don't have a P10, which is your payers or preparers tax identification number, that each of us who are legitimate preparers and we have authorization by the IRS, we're connected with them. If you have a return, or you're looking at a return from a friend or family member and it's not signed, and they tell you it was prepared by somebody else, you should have that one looked at by a professional. because I've seen things where Schedule Cs are simply just made up out of thin air, and the client doesn't even have a business because they don't know.
Because they were just trying to get the tax deductions.
They were trying, because the preparer was trying to increase their refund. I mean, I've had clients come to me
they
saying,
were trying to,
I just used somebody at work that everybody else used because they said that this person gets them really good refunds.
Yeah, and that is a common thing I don't know how he did it, but he got me, to pay no tax. And
Right.
I just think that if you don't want to get in trouble, and you need to have somebody that knows
It's
what
ethical.
they're doing, and you're going to have to pay for it. And it's not like you have to pay an arm and a leg, but you do need to pay for it, and don't cheap out on it, because when you cheap out on it, that I feel like is when really bad things happen.
Yes, absolutely. And that was the case with this particular gentleman. Like, this person was only going to charge me $100, and I got a $400 higher refund than I did last year. And I said, is it worth it to be at risk, to have to deal with this when the
and then to
IRS
pay all the
comes on
penalties
and to pay the penalties and the interest that accrues on that for
Absolutely.
$400. I don't think it's worth it.
I know,
but
everybody does it
yeah,
differently.
and Arizona doesn't regulate tax preparers like some other states do. So that's why it's so rampant, and why it's so critical for you to ask really good questions.
Yeah, to make sure that you're getting the right services that you need. Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And thank you, everybody, for listening. If you enjoyed the show, be sure to leave a review. You need to scroll all the way down. I would love to have your feedback. And if you leave the review, it helps us with the algorithm and reach other people. So have a great day.